universe.
So, after Silent Hill Origins, Konami gave the Silent Hill IP to a different American studio. Last time it was Climax Games, and this time it's a brand new company called Double Helix. Silent Hill Homecoming was the very first game Double Helix would create as a development team. Now, we're talking about a legendary IP here. Konami clearly doesn't really value their properties very much. They're so willing to hand it down to a brand new studio that's never developed anything before. Not to mention, after Homecoming, they've put out nothing but fantastic games such as G.I. Joe, Rise of Cobra, and Green Lantern. But who knows? After the blandness that was Origins, maybe the modern direction they take the Silent Hill franchise in will do the stale formula some good. The game was released in 2008 for the Xbox 360 and the PlayStation 3. It was the very first Silent Hill game to be on next-gen consoles with HD graphics. It was also the very first Silent Hill game to be completely cancelled in Japan. Yeah, that's right, this game is the only Silent Hill game never to come out in Japan. Perhaps the Japanese didn't want to see a franchise that once belonged to them ruined by Americanization? And believe me when I say this game definitely suffers from Americanization. I'll be taking a look at the PS3 version for good measure. Just like Metal Gear Solid, Silent Hill games have always been very native to PlayStation consoles, and as a PlayStation gamer myself, obviously I'm gonna have the PlayStation versions of the games. So anyway, enough talk, why don't we start a brand new file up and get started. Wait a minute. Oh, come on, you gotta be kidding me. Again, no separate puzzle difficulty? Come on, guys, what gives? Whatever, Origins didn't have it either, so I don't know what I was expecting here. So, Silent Hill Homecoming is about Alex Shepard, a young adult on his way home from his service in the army. Kinda like Silent Hill 3, the game begins with a nightmare sequence. It kicks off with a spooky hospital scene ripped directly out of Jacob's Ladder. Like, seriously, this scene is a complete ripoff of that hospital scene towards the end of Jacob's Ladder. Then again, Silent Hill 2 kinda ripped off the flaming hotel scene in Barton Fink. See it as an homage if you'd like, but to me, it's a little too similar for me to let it slide. Left alone in his room, strapped to a table, Alex's doctor leaves and, oh my god, he gets murdered! Oh no, guys, we better get out of here. We gotta mash that X button. This is supposed to be so intense, but if you just don't push any buttons, nothing happens. I left Alex strapped to that bed for 10 minutes, and believe me when I tell you that whatever killed the doctor, he ain't interested in you. In fact, nothing is. After a long nap, Alex finally breaks free from the table. We then get to start exploring the spooky hospital. Homecoming controls vastly different than any previous Silent Hill game. Completely gone are the fixed and wide camera angles with a modern third-person camera in its place. Like any typical third-person game during the PS3 era, you control the camera with the right stick and your character with the left. Though it's one of those games like RE4 where the character is always facing the direction the camera's aimed at. So if you want to turn around and run away from something, you have to swing the camera all the way around you 180 degrees before you can do so. So it's almost like tank controls, but a much weirder version of it. A version that doesn't need to exist. I mean, when you're in full control of the camera, what's the point? Because if you try to walk backwards, you don't go very fast. And this especially sucks when you need to bolt in the opposite direction when a horde of monsters are in your way. But since a game lacks the quick turnaround button past games have, you'll be swinging the camera all the way around before you can do that. The camera also just feels really sluggish. It's weird to describe, but it never feels fast or precise enough. It's just too floaty. Subpar controls aside, the beginning isn't half bad. Exploring the building is fun, and the puzzles, while simple, aren't half bad either. The environment is definitely what I wanted to see from an HD Silent Hill game. It hits the mark surprisingly well with the rusty and bloody environments presented in HD. If he's seeing stuff like this in his dreams, I wouldn't be surprised if he had PTSD from the war. You know, I kinda experience PTSD myself every time I see a mirror in this game. Thankfully, Silent Hill Homecoming doesn't have any of that. Instead, we're back to the classic scenarios of Silent Hill 1, where the world would change to the other world and stay the other world until you're finished the level. For the first time in series history, we actually see a real transition to the other world, and it's pretty damn rad. The way reality literally starts crumbling apart and floating away is just really cool. And right here, around that corner, we get to see the game's very first terrifying creature. It's a sexy nurse. Seriously? Why? Why sexy nurses? Like I stated in the last video, James had sexy nurses because of his emotional backstory and his repressed hatred for women. It was symbolic. Just like Travis Alex has nothing to do with women. His backstory, his emotions, it's got nothing to do with women. Nothing. So, why sexy nurses? Why? Again, this is why. Because it's
iconic to the franchise,
rather than because it actually belongs in the damn game. And if you think that's bad, Pyramid Head shows up. I don't think I even need to explain to you how wrong this is. He's literally just there for fan service. You only see him twice in the entire game, and for very brief moments that don't help the plot whatsoever. Anyway, it's time to fight that nurse and experience the game's combat for the very first time. Oh no, not the combat. This is the game's first big problem. See, the developers of Homecoming clearly wanted to make this an action game, because the combat system is all about action. You hold down the left trigger to lock into your enemy, light attack with X and heavy attack with square. You can also string light attacks and heavy attacks into combos with some proper timing and button input. You're also able to dodge with the circle button. One huge issue with this is that most enemy attacks don't have wind-up animations, nor do they have any sort of sound or motion or anything to alert the player of the attack, so there's no real way to anticipate attacks. This makes it incredibly hard to dodge, and you'll end up taking tons of hits that really shouldn't have been your fault because of this. This is made even worse with the long stun times. Remember in Silent Hill Origins how enemies had long stun periods? This time, the tables have turned. After getting hit, Alex will be left vulnerable to more attacks for a number of seconds. If there's more than one enemy attacking you and you happen to get cornered, that's pretty much it. Game over. Now, this combat system isn't that bad if you're only facing one enemy. I mean, it's clearly designed for one-on-one battles since you lock onto a single target, and it works okay enough for that, but the second you put one more enemy in, you're donezo. It soon becomes a monotonous game of cat and mouse, luring each enemy into seclusion before taking it out just so you can safely advance. In previous Silent Hill games, if you didn't want to get hit or take damage and stay alive, you didn't let the enemy anywhere near you. You'd either take them out from a distance with a firearm, or you timed your attack to hit them before they could get anywhere close. In Homecoming, the combat requires getting up close and personal. It requires dodging and anticipating attacks. And it requires skillfully parrying around your enemies and whacking away at them with attack combos. And this just destroys all horror value that could possibly come from the combat. It's no longer, oh my god, I don't want to get near that thing, stay away from me, hey, get back! Now it's, hey, a monster, I'ma rush up, I'ma kill him. How are you going to be afraid of enemies if you want to get close to them? Homecoming's battle system has really made me realize, if you want the player to be afraid of your enemies in the game, you need to create game mechanics that make the player not want to go near them. I'm going to say this straight up. Silent Hill Homecoming has the worst combat system out of any Silent Hill game. And I'm talking games both prior and after. I mean, Silent Hill games in the past have always had clunky but on purpose combat to make you feel like a regular dude struggling to survive in this haunted town. It had great design in both its simplicity and its ambiguity. Homecoming instead has very action-based combat. It's combat that's trying to make you feel like a military badass instead of a regular person. It's combat that's trying to be good and well-made and usable and accidentally becomes clunky. A different kind of clunky. Not the clunky that made us fear the monsters in the dark and in the fog, but a clunky that makes us frustrated and angry when we can't accomplish what the game wants us to because of bad controls. The enemy AI is also painfully stupid. You can easily trump the enemies by doing something as simple as going through a doorway. I found myself using this very often to kill the enemies, and when it's a common strategy in your game to abuse a flaw in the design, that says a lot about the quality of your game. You'd think Alex would be better at this kind of thing. He is a soldier after all. Oh yeah, that's the character thing. You're a soldier. In all past Silent Hill games, you were always just a regular person. A father, a husband, a teenager, some dude who lives in a shabby apartment. But in this game, They tried to add a big character trait in the shape of their profession, and what better to be in an action game than an army man? I guess this idea has potential, but it's completely wasted here. You know how Silent Hill has always been great at symbolism, reinforcing the character's past? Look at it here. Hey, Alex has army toys, cause he's in the army. Oh, and an army poster? Right, cause he's in the army. Oh, did I mention he was in the army? Because he was in the army. It's so blatant and lazy, and bad. Anyway, so after waking up from the nightmare, which involved not being able to find his little brother Joshua, Alex finally arrives at his hometown. However, the whole place seems abandoned and dilapidated and riddled with fog. Oh wow, it's almost like we're in Silent Hill! What? We're not? Where are we? Once home, you actually get to explore the place and solve puzzles just like any other level. I like this part too, exploring each room looking for regular household objects to advance with. It's classic Silent Hill puzzle solving. Like finding an oil canister, going into an alley, taking the gasoline out of an abandoned truck to power the generator in the basement. I like it. The game's structured kinda like the classic games, namely 1 and 2. Explore the town in between exploring buildings. Though unlike Origins, the levels are a lot smaller, so you're never overwhelmed with a huge amount of space to explore all at once. That's good, because the amount of ground you had to cover in Origins made the game too damn tedious. That's not to say Homecoming also doesn't get tedious. I hope you enjoy jogging at a casual pace the entire game because Homecoming completely lacks a run button. Your top speed just isn't very fast, and it makes traveling take a lot longer than it needs to, and running from enemies all more frustrating. Now, the puzzles in the game, they are really hit and miss. At its best, it's about finding an array of objects to use in inventive ways to advance. At its worst, it's a total mess. Take these wire puzzles for example. You have to put them in the right order and then flip the switch to see if you have them in the right spot. It's trial and error, and it isn't difficult, but moving wires over each other will also move the ones you don't want to move, making it a chore to get everything where you want it. There's also this sliding block puzzle near the end of the game that can just straight up go to hell. Took me 20 goddamn minutes to solve this thing. This belongs in a Professor Layton game. It certainly isn't something I look for in Silent Hill. Just like any other Silent Hill game, as you progress, you'll obtain a variety of weapons. You'll start out with a small knife and then progress with a pipe and axe. The weapons affect the combat in ways obvious enough not to require explaining, but they also serve other purposes. With each of these weapons, you'll also be able to open certain pathways. For example, the knife can cut through certain obstacles, pipes can pry open jammed gates, and axes can chop away at boarded up doors. While I do like the idea, the execution of it renders each of these obstacles completely meaningless. Once you get each weapon, you have it forever, so there'll never be a time where you don't have the required weapon to open a door. Now, it makes sense for the areas previously inaccessible and areas that you'll later revisit, but in most cases, a boarded up door is no different than a jammed gate because you'll always have both weapons. What they could have done is made it so you somehow didn't have access to all the weapons at once. I'm sure they could have found a way to do it. I don't know. It's good on paper, but there's just not enough to it. In addition to melee weapons, of course, you get a gun. Though the excuse as to why you get a gun in this game is really dumb.
Soldiers gotta have a gun.
Yes, those are words a character literally says when asked why he's giving you a gun. Yeah, okay, no argument. I'll take that. Alright. Aiming your firearm controls very differently, as you'll actually manually aim at your target as if the game's a third-person shooter. I don't know how I feel about this. It does make you feel more in control, and in turn, it does make the gun hard to use, though I suppose that's the point, and I kinda like it for that, I guess. The shotgun, on the other hand, as long as you're at close range, you ain't missing your target. There's also parts of the game that heavily focus on wiping out enemies with guns, and again, you can tell they were really trying to make this an action game. I don't like this because that's not what Silent Hill is about. It's about horror, which Homecoming completely lacks. Why would I be afraid of encountering enemies when my police friend is gonna wreck their shit in a matter of seconds? Yeah, you saw that right. He tore right through the thing. And even when you are alone, encountering enemies is more frustrating than it is scary. Many times I found myself getting physically angry because of dying so many times after getting stuck in an unfair stun lock, or having a single enemy plow through all of my health, making me waste healing items just because of it. Sure, the game's got bloody rooms and big creepy monsters, but it completely lacks the atmosphere and proper gameplay it needs for that classic Silent Hill terror. A good example to compare and contrast with are the nurses. In previous games, they'd shake and vibrate in ways a human being physically could not. It was unsettling because a human being can't physically achieve movement like that. It was unnatural, and that's why it was great. In Homecoming, it just looks like they mocapped a real person, telling them to twitch and be scary. It looks too real, like a person is just trying to act spooky for a Halloween prank or something. Another thing I really hate is that there's parts of the game where you're not even fighting against monsters, but just dudes in hazmat suits. Yeah, this is the only Silent Hill game where regular people are also enemies. That's dumb! Now, that's not to say that the game's monster design is completely lacking, because some of these things, namely the bosses, do occasionally have truly terrifying designs. It's just a shame that they were put into scenarios that completely lack horror.
You don't know anything about Silent Hill.
Was she talking about the developers? Because I can totally agree. The only thing scary about this game is the uncanny valley the game's terrible character models occasionally enter. Look at this! That's creepy! But for all of the wrong reasons. It's mostly just this one character. She looks terrible. She looks like a Barbie doll. Alex's model looks fine. In fact, the whole game looks about what you'd expect from a 2008 game. It's really not bad at all. But the character models and animations, outside of Alex and a handful of main characters, really needed some work. It's actually laughable how completely divisive the quality control in this game is. Just watch this cutscene here. Lip syncing's great, characters have decent animation, and then suddenly there's a cut, and the scene resumes in-game, and the characters are suddenly animated very poorly with really, really bad lip syncing. Can you even call that lip syncing? Their mouths are hardly even moving. The voice acting is also really hit and miss. Overall, it's subpar at best, but there are some moments of brilliance with some genuinely great voice acting.
This is a symbol of our family's past and our future.
Can I wear it?
You are never to show anybody this ring. Not even Alex.
But I want to show Alex.
Do you remember when I told you sometimes you must do things and not ask why? Well, this is one of those times.
At least the game's music is great. Again, it's composed by Akira Yamaoka. Does the job as usual, but I mean, like, at this point, that's all I can really say about it. There's so much the game just doesn't do very well, but there's bits of things I like. The exploration is pretty fun, some of the puzzles are kind of neat, and I really like the environments, being given to us in frequent and short bursts. And that fixes the issues that Origins suffered from, having not a lot of levels that were way too long. Instead, here we have a lot of levels that are very short. But the overall gameplay and the presentation are just way too clunky. The combat is frustrating, and the controls are sluggish, and the characters just feel flat. So far, I'm only digging about a third of what Homecoming has to offer. So you got one last chance to sell me on your Homecoming, your story. Let's take a look at it. Okay, so Alex comes home from the army and the town's deserted, and it turns out people are going missing. There's the cookie cutter girlfriend character and the tough black guy character and the... These characters aren't interesting. Alex's big character motif is that he was in the army, but there's also some dumb plot twist about he was really at a mental hospital because he's crazy, which, by the way, is the most stupid and cliche and thoughtless plot twist you could possibly put in a horror game. And it doesn't even have any sort of payoff. Essentially, Alex's father always treated Alex like crap, and he treated his little brother Josh with utmost love and respect. Supposedly, he had to make his son hate him in order to keep some curse at bay. It's not explained very well, at least from what I gathered. Maybe I wasn't paying enough attention, who knows. Outside of those points, the game's plot is just you trying to find your little brother. There's a handful of moral choices you can make, and they'll affect the ending you get. None of the endings are very interesting, though. One's a generic, oh, the happy ending, but it only really involves Alex getting out okay, and that's about it. Then there's one where Alex becomes Pyramid Head. Why? And then finally, there's also the UFO ending. Nice to see them carrying on Silent Hill tradition, but that's simply not enough to excuse the poor plot. It's just not very good. Not just the story, but the game as a whole. Sure, there's like bits and pieces I like, but overall, the game is a clunky mess that's trying too hard to be an action game while being confined to roots it clearly doesn't want to be confined to. Homecoming does have a lot of great ideas, but they're just not executed in ways that take advantage of their full potential. The game's not terrible, but it is a pretty miserable excuse of a Silent Hill game. Just like Origins, I'm gonna have to give this one a thumbs down. Well, this certainly isn't looking very good. We're only 2 games in, and 2 games I already don't like. But what's next on the list here? Silent Hill Shattered Memories. Who made this one? Climax again? Seriously? Well, I guess we'll try to be a little optimistic with this one too. Who knows, maybe they learned from their mistakes and sticking a little too close to a stale formula they really didn't understand. Who knows? We'll find out next week when we tackle Silent Hill Shattered Memories for the Nintendo Wii. It's weird that a Silent Hill game's on a Nintendo console, but nevertheless, I'll see you guys next week. I hope you guys have been enjoying the Silent Hill Marathon, and I hope you guys continue to enjoy the Silent Hill Marathon. See you next time. James had sexy nurses because of his emotional backstory with women.